Good to see you. Haven't made a car video for a while, and I wanted to touch upon what I often like to touch upon. And I think what makes the content of this channel usually quite different than most of the manifesting or law of assumption, law of attraction type of advice that we find on YouTube. And that is that most of these concepts, when it comes to feeling better inwardly, doing inner work to not only feel better, but to see our external world change, to shift, to demonstrate a better quote unquote reality. In my opinion, most of these concepts that we hear about and are so popular on platforms like YouTube, Instagram, Reddit, TikTok, they're easy to understand intellectually. They're not that hard to understand. They intellectually can be deciphered relatively easily, I think, by most people, especially if you have like a high school level education, let alone went to college or something like that and had to read stuff in college, write essays in college. I think the general concepts are simple to understand intellectually. And the secret, the way that was presented back in the mid 2000s, I think that can be understood by most people who have a middle school education, maybe even elementary school education, and we always hear about, people who had an innocent mind like children. Coué always had a lot of success also with peasants. People who were not that educated but believed had a lot of success with these concepts. So I don't think it's hard to understand this stuff intellectually. However, this is what's not discussed on YouTube and elsewhere usually. Getting this stuff to work in our lives is not about intellectually understanding it all that much. Most people watching these YouTube videos understand the main concepts of manifesting very well. It's not hard. Again, you watch The Secret, you get the general gist, and then you find out about more, quote unquote, advanced stuff like Neville, for instance, or maybe Abraham Hicks. And conceptually, it makes some sense. But this video is a reminder to tell you that doesn't really matter all that much. Understanding and talking about it are very different than doing and implementing and integrating these ideas directly into your life. And the latter is much harder. But if you go on YouTube or other social media platforms, that's not going to be conveyed to you well. Instead, it's going to be like, oh, you understand these concepts, just live in the end. Or, just say this affirmation and, you're going to manifest what you want in 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. And obviously that can sometimes happen. But it's not usually going to happen for you like that at all. And for the vast majority of people, it's never going to happen like that for something significant in their life. If these ideas, which are very easy to understand intellectually, were a fraction as easy to actually apply and integrate into our lives, the whole world would be different. And you would hear much more about them, and they would be accepted by mainstream culture, mainstream medicine. But most of these ideas are very hard to integrate without genuine inner work. And we find if we can integrate them even just a little bit, it helps. It helps. The last podcast episode I did, I read from H. Emily Cady and Joel Goldsmith, who are two of my favorites. Two of the best at getting deep about this stuff. Certainly right up there with Neville in terms of explaining this stuff, in my opinion. And they were talking about how difficult this is. I like easy. I like being relaxed. I like making things as simple as possible. That's why I always talk about relaxation and cultivating relaxation, right? If you don't already have it, you can go to my website and download the Relaxation Manifesto. But the point is, even though we want things to be easy, and most of us get into these ideas, at least in part, because we want things to be easier and we want to relax more, try less, even though we really want that, and that's what attracts many of us to these ideas, you're probably going to find it's a lot harder to be inwardly relaxed than you might initially expect. That the idea sounds great and incredibly appealing, but then actually doing it and finding out that you are not as relaxed a person as you think, and that your life is not as chill and as simple to change as you initially expected when you found out about these ideas, well, that's sobering. And that's also where the real work starts, if you want to get into these ideas. If you figured out a way to feel more inwardly at peace and fulfilled, and to feel more relaxed and in flow more of the time, to feel like your imagination and your willpower is more aligned, to feel like the universe truly is flowing through you, or God is flowing through you. If you figured out a way to do that works for you, just keep on doing that. For gosh sake, don't watch any more YouTube videos talking about these concepts, because that's the work, is what I just described there. But almost everybody, including myself, it's not that easy to do. It's hard to figure this out. And it's a continual process, and you think you figured something out, and then something else might come up. And that's fine. That's fine. But if you already know how to get into like the desired state or live in the end or all these other pop phrases, if you actually know how to do that and feel that and integrate that into your life, that's it. That's it. But most people have no idea. They talk a big game, but then actually doing it, that's when everybody gets real quiet all of a sudden. Talking a big game and then not being able to actually integrate it or back it up, or promising people big results without being able to back it up, manifest something in 3 days, 3 weeks, whatever, and then that not happening for people after you promising them that's going to happen. This is just how it works. Just live in the end, just do this. That's bullshit. I'm going to read a little bit more from Finding the Christ in Ourselves by H. Emily Cady. Again, I'll put the podcast link to that Cady and Goldsmith episode I recently did. It's well worth listening to if you are liking this video. I'm just going to read excerpts from this. I'm not going to read, the whole parts here. I'm going to skip over. But Cady writes in this: the Christ lives in us always. God, the creative energy, sent his Son first, even before the body was formed, and he ever abides within, the firstborn of all creation. Later on, she writes, "The Christ in us has been there all the time, but we have not known it, and so our little ships have been tossed about by sickness and poverty and distrust until we have seemed almost lost. I, the true spiritual self of me, am one with the Christ. You, the true spiritual self of you, are one with the Christ. The true self of every person is the child of God, made in his image." Later on, she says, "Now already we are sons." Later on, she says, "We are projections of the invisible presence into visibility. God made us one with the Father, even as Jesus was, and just in proportion as we recognize this fact and claim our birthright, the Father in us will be manifested to the world." You know, in that podcast episode, I was saying, does that sound easy to you? That's the work. And she's obviously using very spiritual terms. We don't have to use such spiritual terms. We can use more psychological terms if this religious language makes you uncomfortable. But this is very similar to Neville's language, except this is written well before Neville ever, taught. God made us one with the Father, even as Jesus was, and just in proportion as we recognize this fact and claim our birthright, the Father in us will be manifested to the world. Most of us innately avoid saying, "Your will be done, thy will be done." Because of false teachings and from associations, we have believed that this prayer, if answered, would take away from us all that gives us joy or happiness. Surely nothing can be further from the truth. Oh, how we have tried to crowd the broad love of God into the narrow limits of human mind. The grandest, most generous, loving Father that ever lived is but the least bit of God's fatherhood manifested through the flesh. God's will for us mean more love, more purity, more power, more joy in our lives every day. No study of spiritual or material things, no effort, though it be superhuman on our part, could ever be as effectual in making grand, godlike creatures, showing forth the same limitless soul that Jesus showed, just as praying continually the one prayer, "Thy will be done in me." For the Father's will is to manifest his perfect being through us. Later on, she says, "Christ is in us, one with us, so we may boldly and with confidence say, 'In Christ all things are mine.' Declaring it will make it manifest." Then she says, "Above all things, learn to keep to the Christ within yourself, not that within someone else. Let the Father manifest through you in his own way, though his manifestation differs from that of his other children. Heretofore, even the most spiritually enlightened of us have been mere ants, because we have, by the action of our conscious thought, limited the divine manifestation to make it conform to the manifestation through someone else. God will make us spiritual giants if we will but take away all the limits and give him opportunity." This is a subjective process, an individualized process, which we integrate personally. It's a deep process. You can say it's a deep psychological process, or if we're using religious language like we just read here, we can say it's a deep spiritual process. Someone like Katie is talking about that. When I work with clients, that's what we're trying to facilitate, the deep inner process. I make these videos to, in their own small way, point to the depth of these wonderful teachings and ideas. This is your life. This does not manifest something in 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. This is your whole life. The majority of people watching this video will not understand that, just to be blunt. But it's not because I'm saying anything special or that it's complicated or that you have to go to have your PhD to understand what I'm saying. Quite the contrary. It's that people will be tied down by the groupthink and the high school popularity contest, which is the way that most of these ideas are presented online. And they won't listen to themselves. That small inner voice that will help tell you what you want to do and what you are doing with these concepts, to actually feel them and be with them in your life in a way that's fulfilling. Anybody watching this video can do that if they get that. It's not hard in that way. It's just also not a cheap trick. It's depth. Depth is where it's at. Depth makes this stuff actually work in your life. And depth is what makes you see that while these ideas are not easy to implement, they are something we can implement. And once we even begin to experience that, our life changes for the better. So I hope this was helpful for some of you. If you have questions or are interested in my books or coaching, or would like a free initial consultation with me, I can be reached at radicalcounselor.com.